Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 352 of the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. I'm your host, Anthony Arena. The show notes are located at continuefit.com or strengthcoachpodcast.com. All right, on the strengthcoach.com and mbsc.tv Coach's Corner, I spoke with Coach Boyle about a huge Twitter thread he had. He said it might be his most engagement ever. It was about young athletes doing body part workouts, and I basically asked him if there's ever a time, maybe a phase when you're trying to gain some weight, if that would be possible, but we'll talk about that. I asked him about farmers carry standards and programming. That was from the strengthcoach.com forum, as well as a question about approaching young women about their weight, and that was also a question on the forum. There was a situation with a coach that came up, so we'll talk all about it with Coach Boyle. Don't forget, I also did a special interview called 40 Mistakes, 40 Years. You can get that at strengthcoachpodcast.com. For the Hit the Gym with a Strength Coach segment brought to you by Athletic Greens, you can get a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/strengthcoach. I have on legendary Lacrosse coach Dom Starsia. Dom, 42 years in the college ranks, 4 Division I NCAA national championships, 8-time ACC Coach of the Year, 3-time National Coach of the Year. He's the author of the book, I hope you will be very happy, Leadership Lessons from a Lifetime in Lacrosse. The book was recommended to me by Coach Boyle. Amazing book, not just for lax players and coaches. And I spoke to Coach Starsia about why parents should back off and let kids make some mistakes on their own, his thoughts on kids playing multiple sports, why getting up for breakfast every morning could be a game changer for a college athlete, and how it transformed one of his players and why he recommends it to all of his players, why they should stop calling their mother about everything. That was a specific chapter in the book. Basically, these are all, for the most part, a lot of letters to students and parents and athletes. Pretty cool. Also, his thoughts on college athletes pledging a fraternity or sorority, his definitions of honesty and fearlessness and why he thinks they are the most important factors for leadership, the importance of positive language and remembering that you cannot take it back, and so much more coming up from Coach. We just a great interview, great book. I know you're going to enjoy that. Highly recommend this book. For the Nomly, Maximizing the Member Experience with Sumi Seth, founder of Nomly. Don't forget, Nomly helps build relationships through personalized communication so your members stay longer and pay longer. You can go to nomly.com, NAAMLY.com. You can schedule a demo to get a feel for what it's all about. Use the referral code Strength Coach to get started on your free 30-day trial. Today, Sumi tells a story that just happened to him. I think he recorded it at the airport, actually, while he was traveling, and his flights got messed up or he was late. And it just shows you an amazing contrast in customer experience between really how 2 employees from the same company handle it. It's a great story with a happy end. All right, guys, don't forget at Perform Better right now, the online sale, 50% off a bunch of stuff, bumper plates, kettlebells, dumbbells. Also, I said last time, it's still on sale. You can get Boyle's complete youth training set. It's DVD. I know you probably got a DVD set lying around, DVD player, and it's only $49, so that's a steal right there. Guys, the one-day seminars continue in LA, February 18th, Boston, March 18th, and Chicago, April 22nd. The summit dates for Orlando, Chicago, Long Beach, and Providence are all set. I will be speaking at Long Beach this year. Check it all out at performbetter.com. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the strengthcoach.com and mbsc.tv Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. Try the new strengthcoach.com out for 7 days for free. Totally new format, user-friendly, same great forum as always. 7 days for free. Check it out at strengthcoach.com. Coach, how you doing?
I am doing great, Ian. How are you?
All right, I'm all right. I'm not going to start with the Twitter thing yet, but
Oh, you should. Mike's going to be the most likes I ever got. I think I'm getting close to 600 already today at the midpoint of the day, but that's okay. You can say whatever you want.
Well, on the you are on the body part workout one. Wow.
Yeah.
It's
Weird.
interesting.
I just was thought I had this morning as I was sitting.
Yeah. Let me ask you: would there ever be almost like? And I guess I said this to you in a similar fashion last time. When we talk about hypertrophy for certain sports, would there ever be maybe even a phase of, hey guys, we want to get them in the gym more. We want to put some weight on. We need some more volume. We could do like a 6 to 8 week phase of similar, not in like Mike Boyle style bodybuilding, body part types. Would there be something like that?
I only for me, I would say no, because I always talk about, again, we've had the same conversations, people who are longtime listeners. I'm a big slippery slope guy, and when you open that door, or when you let the genie out of the bottle, or whatever it is, you open Pandora's box, it's really hard to slam it shut again. So I think that's my problem with that stuff, is because I always say to people, if you look at our summer workout, it's legs and back and chest, shoulder, and tricep, really. I mean, that's what we do. But we're not going to do more than one exercise per body part. But if you chose to view that workout in bodybuilding terms, a bodybuilder might look at the workout and be like, "Oh man, that's legs and back." You're doing, you're supersetting chin ups and squats, and then you supersetting rows and something else. And I'm like, yeah, basically that's what it is if you look at it in that context. But the other thing is, I'm just not and I've said this also a lot here too, but I am not a big believer in the conventional hypertrophy model. I don't believe that more volume produces hypertrophy, particularly in people that are not real responsive to weights. And I think that's the part that we have to look at. I think we get deceived about hypertrophy because we take somebody who's what I've just always termed a responder. If you're a responder, you're the guy who gets big easy. And no matter what he does, it works. And we're going to look at that and think, oh, he did 10 sets of 10, German volume training. Oh, that's the way you got to go to get big. You go and take your 6'6", 160-pound basketball player, and you try to do German volume training with him, and he's not going to gain any weight, and he's probably going to get hurt. So I think we've got to be really careful. And I've said all these things repeatedly, but we take what we get from the steroid world and we assume that it applies to the non-steroid world, and it doesn't. And that's where the hypertrophy, the pump, the volume, all that stuff comes from the bodybuilding world, which is primarily the steroid world. And that's just the way that it is. And even in some ways, I say that with some of the powerlifting stuff, whether it's West Side stuff. I mean, there's so much of this stuff that is forever entangled with drugs that when you kind of push all that stuff away and really look into kind of, as I've alluded to, the Jason Ferrugia stuff, or the Stuart McRoberts stuff, the hard gainer things, the natural bodybuilder stuff, you see a big emphasis on low volume and probably a little bit more higher intensity, quote unquote, one set to failure kind of stuff, actually, as being really successful for these people. So I think there's multiple layers to this. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, you use the word steroids, which no one really, for the most part, people aren't using because I feel like it's disguised. I have something I was working on, and just because I do drink, as you know, I'm not as much of a drinker as people might think. I do a couple nights a week have a few bourbons, right? I might have wine with dinner once a week, maybe, but I'm not completely against alcohol. But I'm not completely for it either. It's a personal choice. I have plenty of friends that had to go to rehab, my younger brother, blah, blah, blah. But the one thing is the way they vilify alcohol, the influencers, this is along the same topic. They vilify alcohol while they're on TRT, while they're taking every supplement that is not even researched or tested, or they're doing all these new supplements. They have every energy drink. They're drinking C4s and bangs. And then they're like, hey, don't drink alcohol. It's toxic. I mean, it's so hypocritical to me. But I think when you say steroid, what else is encompassed in that word when you say it's not, because people are gonna, you and I are old enough to be like, hey, those are the guys that took shots in their ass in the 80s, right? But there's
But I
more
think
to it.
there's way more of that going on than people think, to be honest. Way more. And you alluded, I think the TRT thing, legal steroids. There's lots of guys in
Yeah.
your 50 over 50 kind of guy who goes to the doctor and says, I don't have the old energy that I used to have, blah blah blah. Oh, here, try this. I mean, that's steroids. That testosterone replacement is steroids. There are people again who will say, "Oh, it's good for you. You're gonna do it's whatever." Like, I can't get past the idea of cheating. That's my problem. And
Yeah.
so when I look at that, and that, I mean, maybe that's an old school mentality, but I looked at that and thought, whether it was bodybuilding, whether it was powerlifting, whatever it was, that people who were willing to, because the drugs work. That's the problem with, and I think it's the difference between performance, and that's what I was talking about, performance enhancing drugs. Alcohol is clearly not a performance enhancing drug.
No.
It's a drug, but it doesn't make you better. It makes you think you're better at a lot of things.
Yeah, a lot of things.
Singing, dancing, there's a so it's probably a self-image enhancer in some ways, but certainly not a performance enhancer.
No.
Whereas when you get into the performance enhancing drug thing, and that's primarily steroids, human growth hormone, who knows what else. But what you end up with is you wade into this chemical battle where it's really now it's no longer about the training information, but it's about the chemistry set that you have and the chemist that you have working with you. And that to me is where the problem is when you get into things like even into sprinting and you start looking at people and thinking, okay, who's the fastest person? Well, I'd like to know who the fastest person is without drugs. And I'd like to know who the strongest person is without drugs, rather than knowing, okay, this person is willing to really put their health at risk to take. And again, in my lifetime, you'd see people, I mean, massive amounts of drugs, not, I mean, things that there was no way to ever rationalize that it was safe or that it was good for you. It was strictly about winning or performing or
Yeah.
whatever. So, and again, that to me is the slippery slope, because I've never seen people doing a little bit of steroids. Most of the people that I saw do it, they got into it. And I can remember having conversations. I had one close kid I coached at BU who was a wrestler who ended up, he gained about 100 pounds, was, Mr. Rhode Island, and eventually died. And he stated one time that I would rather be dead than be small again. And
Wow.
and that's the kind of stuff, because people, again, there was a big debate about, are steroids psychologically addictive? And I'm in the camp that yes, they are. Whether, again, the research may say they aren't, but I saw people become psychologically addicted to people seeing them outside and walking up and touching them, and oh my God, look at your muscles, and and the self-image boost that comes with that was so significant that I think these people could never stop doing it again. And I think that's what you see with a lot of the lifetime steroid users. I don't ever want to be small. I don't ever want to be weak. I never want to go back to where I was. And so for me, I'm really fearful of that, because as I said, that's the slippery slope thing. If you get a kid who tries that and all of a sudden gets that holy shit moment of, my God, look at, I'm so much stronger.
Look
I
at the
gained,
attention I'm getting too.
yeah, and the attention that I'm getting. I used to say, when it was more of an issue in college, when I was in college, I would always say, steroids are kind of a good kid drug, because you could get a good kid who was, trying to make the football team or whatever it was, and he could very easily get wrapped up in this subculture and then find, wow, I can't get out of this
Yeah.
because I've gotten this gratification that I get from this drug is so significant that I don't want to give it up. So I think it's a really complex thing,
Yeah.
but I just have always been very strongly anti, like, hey, let's do it right. And I think that's why I had this conversation with somebody the other day. I don't even know who I was talking to, but I had said that's why, actually, I was talking to a guy from Men's Health. And I said, that's why it was so important for me to be able to get guys stronger naturally, because you never wanted someone to look at you and think, this isn't working. I'm not getting better. I'm not getting bigger. I'm not getting stronger. We were talking about creatine, and every kid who asked me about creatine, I'm like, take it. Absolutely. It'll help, because it is probably the safest and most well-researched ergogenic aid there is out there. It's safe, it's legal, it works. And so when kids ask, I'm like, absolutely. Kids ask about protein supplements, absolutely. Like, do
Yeah.
everything you can legally to get every advantage that you possibly can. So
Yeah, and along the same lines, a big problem obviously is social media. It's almost impossible to have a business without taking your shirt off. Like in this industry, in fitness industry, not performance, but even with performance, people kind of want to see that guy, these up and coming trainers, like that they're doing it too and they're looking good. And it's a big barrier and it's a big influence. It's social media is just the new bodybuilding magazines, right? They've taken over
I get
those.
I get in that argument probably once a month on Twitter, where someone talks about, do you need to look the part? Do you need to walk the walk? And it's like, no, you don't. But again, most people feel you do, and the people who feel you do are the people who look the part. And
Yeah.
that's the difference. So it's not guys like, I'm not out there saying to people, oh yeah, man, you got to look the part. Like, you can't look like me. But the reality is, and I always say, I want my coaches to look athletic. I want you to look at that coach and think, hey, he or she is in shape. He
Yeah.
or she can run, and he or she can jump, and he or she is an effective demonstrator. But I honestly, and I've said this before, but I don't want jacked. I don't want that, because again, I don't want to be looking at my staff members and thinking, wow, is that guy dabbling in whatever?
Yeah.
I now have to worry, because that's the other thing that happens is, what I found is that people, not all people, but a lot of people that are using performance enhancing drugs, they tend to be the ones who encourage other people to use performance enhancing drugs. So
Yeah.
there tends to be some perpetuation of that culture from somebody saying, "Hey, I can really help you. If you
Yeah.
listen to me, you'll really get strong." And you start looking at that person and thinking, and again, that's why I always say good kid drug. It's easy to ensnare a good kid in that net, because it's usually a kid who's probably a little bit insecure, trying to make a team, trying to get to college, whatever it is. And then someone says, "Hey, if you just do this, if you just do a little," it's kind of standard drug pusher stuff, right?
Yeah.
Here, just try it, right? Just try it. It's not bad for you. You'll be okay. You won't get addicted, whatever it is. Yeah, but yet, if you're dealing with someone who's actually making money by selling this stuff, they're just another drug dealer to me. I don't think
Yeah.
it makes a difference.
Sure. Coach, let's
Probably,
move on to.
we're probably gonna lose a lot of people this week on this podcast.
Yeah. um, the
Unsubscribe.
I want to go into farmers carries. It was a thread on the shrinkcoach.com forum, and it kind of reminded me a little bit of what zone two, like in terms of the standard idea. There's a lot of confusion. I think Peter Attia had actually said, somebody said he had said 100% of their body weight for 2 minutes. You had heard, according to the forum, 100% of the body weight for 4 minutes. Somebody else said Dan John was 50 yards with 50% body weight in each hand was his strength standard. And then you had said you tried 75% for a minute, and it's really hard. FCS, functional capacity screen. This is a quote from them. For general function, we expect a minimum carry distance of 250 feet for 90 seconds with 75% body weight while maintaining postural integrity. There are two metrics because they don't want you to go really fast to cover the 250 or go really slow not to walk
250 feet, 90 seconds. So 250 feet. So we're talking about, uh,
about 1 yard a second.
yeah. And I mean, I'm sorry. So 75 yards, give or take, right? 80 yards, 80 something, 83, I guess. But yeah, 83 yards. So that would be, I'm just trying to think of our gym, would basically be up, back, up, 90 seconds, 75%. I mean, that's still, honestly, it's a pretty high bar. I would be interested to see, and I think somebody said in the forum with the Atia thing, I think he must have misspoke, to be honest, because I thought I read 100% of body weight for 4 minutes. And I would need to go back. It's in his kind of centenarian Olympics podcast that he did. I got to go back maybe and listen to it again. And he's a guy I'd love it. If we ever got him on, that would be great. But I'm like, there's no way. Like he said, oh, my clients, something like all my clients can do this. And I thought, who are your clients?
Yeah.
But again, I'm old. I'm not particularly strong. So I look at it and think, okay, 75%. I mean, I've gone 75% for a minute. I probably could, if someone said the standard is 90 seconds, I probably could have hung on for another 30 seconds knowing, and, turned around and gone back up the turf one more time so that I get to the 80, whatever, 3 yards or something. But it's certainly not easy. So, but again, you go back to the idea is, yeah, you just want people, hey, carrying heavy stuff is good for you.
Yeah, and you're not working on it either. Like that's not something you work on. If you said, "Hey, in 6 weeks,"
I have been a little bit because when I first started, I thought, wow, this is harder because I can remember, I think, grabbing like 24s and thinking, okay, 24s, and then realizing, wow, this is not really that heavy, and realizing it was a lot harder than I thought. So I have kind of worked on it. I will do some carries with the idea that I do want to get better at it, and I'm into like the 28s and 32s. 32s I find bother me a little bit. Like when I'm done, sometimes I'm like, with me it's the upper trap load bothers my neck a little bit. So
yeah,
I finished and thought, I don't know if that was the best idea I ever had.
yeah.
But
The
I will admit that I work on it a little bit.
where do you program them? Because I did some like last week. I did 100 in each hand, and it was at the end of the workout. I had done one arm rows already. I'd done a couple other things. I did I just did 30 seconds just for the hell of it. Just wanted to check. Hey, how
Yeah,
far can I do?
I just do it. It's like usually the last thing that we do, just
Okay.
because I feel like because it is such a general, really total body. Obviously, it's grip limited more than anything. But when you look at, I always go back to kind of McGill's thing. The highest hip loads were yoke carries. So basically, walking with really heavy loads on your shoulders. So I think when you're doing those carries, you're getting really good hip loads. You're getting upper back loads. You're getting grip strength. So I hate the term finisher, but I think in that case, it probably does meet that standard, I guess.
Yeah, and if you were going to test, you would be like, "Hey, let's do a warm up and test then," because
Yeah,
that would be
that's
fair.
true. I hadn't really thought about that. I have never gone and said, okay, I'm just going to grab these fresh. I don't do that much lifting before
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah. Now, have you ever programmed? I know I thought you mentioned trap bar or even farm. They said farmers carry bars. They were actually a little bit easier. Have you played around with that at all?
We have a
Trap
set of
bar.
farms carry bars, but we eventually moved them out because they were kind of a pain in the ass because they get in the way and they've taken up all these plates. So yeah, it would be interesting to see. That's why I said our hockey guys, Mark's friends, they've walked around with 225 with no problem on the trap bar. They've just, they just when they were goofing around. So
Yeah,
I kind of look at that and think I probably could trap bar walk with 135 pretty easily.
yeah,
Whereas the thickness, that's what I mean. The thickness of the handle, all that stuff plays into.
sure.
So if you've got kettlebells with big, thick handles, those are going to be harder, and that's what we tend to use for our carries.
Yeah, yeah. Um, what about pull up bar holds, Coach? Have you played with that at all?
Like hangs.
Yeah, hangs. I'm sorry, hangs. Yeah,
Yeah. No, I don't like. It's really interesting. I can remember a physical therapist saying to me one time that I don't think that's good for your shoulder joint in general. And there are people who say, I can remember like Dewey years ago talking about, brachiation and that it's really good for your shoulder joint. And it probably is if you have healthy shoulder joints. But again, we go back to the idea, if you've got people who can't, they don't have full shoulder flexion, and they can't get their arms up over their head, and then you say hang from that, I don't think that's good for you. So
it's
what I
fun.
like is probably more like we'll hang off like like a lat stretch, or hang more like, inverted row kind of hang where we're not getting quite as much load and we're not in as much shoulder flexion. I think that's probably a safer hang. But I know there's a lot of people that are really into hangs, but I wonder if they're people that are working with the the range of age brackets that we're working with, or are they just working with athletes? And
Yeah,
I know, like, the other thing they said, like, our baseball guys, they would not hang. They didn't even want to do, a lot of them didn't even want to do chin-ups because they didn't like that distractive humoral force.
yeah. There's actually a book, John Kirsch, who's a doctor. He wrote a whole book, and it's based around the hangs. It's called Shoulder Pain, question mark, the solution and prevention. I actually got a guy to buy it. I said, I don't know how this is going to work. I've heard some good things about hangs. He was having, he swears by this. He like, every time he saw me, he's like, thanks for doing that. I mean, I didn't take part in it, but I
Yeah.
recommended the book just to try, because he said he tried everything. And yeah, so I mean, some people believe that it can help, like you talked about Dewey with the distraction and the full range, and that's going to help. So
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know.
yeah. One last thing, Cole Herget, great. He talked about it. He had a 15-minute conversation. One of the coaches was very upset. One of his athletes had gained 30 pounds when she arrived on campus. Since she arrived 3 years ago, she got much stronger. She was scrawny 18-year-old, heavier, lots of not a lot of muscle, he said, but in and out of lineup due to lack of speed, which he attributes to her weight gain. Main concern was that Cole did not alert the coach, and that he needed to do a better job presenting the data so he knows what's going on and can evaluate his program better. Cole's question was, am I in the right doing what I do, or should I keep better tabs on athletes' weight and report better to the coach? You said this is a tough one, and having a daughter too, I think you have and you've worked with every top female athlete between the soccer players and the ice hockey players, and the ice hockey players can use a little bit of weight. Talk to us about this thread.
Yeah, I think, to me, you need to make the coaches aware of that, because in general, and one of the things I said in the thread, that's usually indicative of a really poor diet, and it's usually indicative of some alcohol use. I've seen it. Again, I'm generalizing, but if you see a female in college who comes to college and suddenly has a really substantial weight gain, then I'm going to think this is someone who is not doing a good job managing their nutrition and probably is partying, because I always say that, the introduction of beer generally is not good for anybody, but
Yeah.
it can definitely have an effect on female athletes, where suddenly everything has been regulated up to that point, same amount of practice, same amount of everything, but you really drastically change their calorie intake with alcohol. The other thing, and it was funny, I was reading Craig Ballantyne's thing yesterday, and it was so true. His newsletter, I don't know if I still get his Perfect Day newsletter, but one of the
No.
things he said, and he has since quit drinking altogether, but he said that his alcohol intake would correspond directly with his like sugar intake, because the nights that he had a couple drinks were also nights that he'd go home and eat ice cream or eat cookies. And that's me. My willpower literally is eroded by beer. The more beer I drink, the less willpower I have.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll come home and, if there's a box of chocolate chip cookies around, they're probably not safe. So I'll work my way right into those. So I think there's multi layers of that. And I also think what's happened is we have so much fear of creating an eating disorder with our female athletes that some schools have gone to what I would call the ostrich program. We're just going to stick our head in the sand. You can't weigh them, you can't body fat them, you can't do anything. And I think that's a disservice to the female athlete, to be honest, because I think it assumes a frailty and sort of a lack of mental health, in saying, oh, you can't, if you weigh a female athlete or do their body fat, they're going to get an eating disorder. They're going to fall apart. And I think, no, I don't think that's the case. I think you have to be careful, though, because I have seen athletes who are really strongly psychologically affected by their lifetime battle with weight. And actually, I don't know if you've read my tweet on the David Epstein thing, but Epstein interviewed a woman who was, I think, maybe the national record holder or the world record holder in the mile. I actually am going to buy the book because it seems really interesting. But one of the things that she talked about was that in female sports, you have to survive the softening of your body, because she said you're going to go through puberty, and puberty for women is a softening of their body in terms of their developing breasts, their hips are widening, all these things that are happening that are not very performance enhancing, and that it can be really difficult for women to go through that. So it's a very kind of multi-layered thing, but I think the ostrich approach of we're just going to act like it's not happening is probably not the solution to the problem.
Yeah.
It's adding another layer to the problem.
Seems like to me, if you're going to do it, if you're going to take that step, you got to go all in. So you got to make sure you're monitoring, you're having those healthy conversations with them, because if you're worried about the eating disorder, right, it can go both ways. Maybe then she's eating too much or she's not eating enough. So you kind of, if you're going to do it, if you're going to go down that road, you better get ready to be all in.
Right. And the one thing we did, because we body fatted and weighed all of our women's national team people from 2010 until whatever, 18, whenever I stopped doing it. But one of the things that I did is, so we said, if you're over 20% body fat, we're going to have a conversation about nutrition. If you're under 20% body fat, I'm not talking to you about body fat. And it's like some go, well, but I want to get, I'm not talking to you about body fat. We're not going to 20%. If you're under 20, if you're 18, 19, whatever it is, that's great. And we didn't encourage you. There was no reward. There was no like, oh, she had the lowest body fat. There was nothing. Just straight up, here's how we're going to do it. And even if they came back, if someone came to me and said, well, I'd really like to think about getting from 18 to 15, I'm like, I'm not having that conversation with you. Which again, maybe that's me taking the ostrich approach. But my thing was, I know who I have to worry about, and I've got to worry about those in the 20 to 25 category, because looking at our data, those were the people whose performances were probably being affected in terms of, it was very obvious. And that's why I used to set those guidelines kind of arbitrarily, looking and thinking, okay, who's 20? Like when we did it, and who's at 20 or in that range, and how do they look? Okay, who's 21, 22, 25? How do they look? And we just kind of said, okay, 20 is where we can be comfortable that this is enough. Like at BU with our men, it was 10. And again, it was just, the standard, looking at guys and thinking, okay, the guys that are under 10 tend to look and perform the way that we want them to. The guys that are over 10 tend to be the guys who are struggling a little bit more with their body fat. And we did the same thing. We only were dealing really nutritionally with those that were over. But in both situations, we did the exact same thing. Our guys, we told them, you got to be under 10 to play. And we did body fats every couple of weeks. And if you got up over, if you got up above 10, then we kind of gave you a warning, like, all right, let's rein it in. Because usually, again, it was a guy that was not doing a great job in the dining hall and probably was not doing a great job with his alcohol intake. It very much corresponded with the men. With the women, not as much. With the women, I think it just corresponded more to diet than wasn't a big alcohol intake thing.
Yeah, when you say the women, you don't mean the college women, because you said earlier that a lot of times.
Well, both, but I think, but it did. But I usually think when you have like that, when you get that really weird, like 30 pounds is a lot. Like you're not talking, when you think, someone going from 20% body fat to 25. If I take the average female at 150, so it's 1.5 pounds per percent, right? So when someone goes from 150 to 180, you start looking at that number and saying, okay, 30. Divided by 1.5, that person now they've gained significant amount of body fat during that time to be able to push their body fat percentage, or they would push like 30 pounds, it would be a 20% gain in body weight, let's just say.
Yeah.
Which could conceivably cause them to double their body fat percentage.
Yeah. Yeah. Crazy.
And so I think that's why you want to be able to do both. You want to be able to look at scale weight, and you want to be able to have some way, whether it's, and again, the people get all the body fat stuff isn't exact, whether you do DEXA scans or whether you do bod pod, whether you do skin folds. But what we arrived at was, we did skin folds. We used the same tool all the time, and the same person did it. So we would never do skin folds. I did body fats and skin folds every single time myself. So that, because one of the things that gets screwy in skin fold is what they would call inter-rater reliability. So, you and I might do a whole series of body fats, and you might get everybody 5% lower or 5% higher than I did, just because you pinched different than I pinch. But if I pinched everybody every time, we'd eliminate that. We'd eliminate that inter-rater reliability.
Sure.
And then at least we would get, from a statistical standpoint, I always would say to people, we now have data that is reliable, but potentially not valid. And reliable means that we're going to get consistent data. Valid means the data is actually indicative of what their body fat is. I used to tell them all the time, it doesn't matter if it says 20%. That may not be valid. We could argue the validity. Maybe you're not 20% body fat, but the delta, the change will be pretty reliable. So we'd be able to look at that and think, hey, I did your body fat. Last time you were here, I did your body fat. This time you were here, we use the same sites, we use the same markings. So if you have a change, it's probably because there was a change.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Good stuff, Coach. I will let you go on that. And thanks for doing this. And we'll talk to you next time.
Hey, always a pleasure, Ant. You know that.
Welcome to Nomly's Maximizing the Member Experience segment. My name is Sumit Seth, and I'm the co-founder of Nomly. So it's 1:13 a.m., and I'm at gate 39 of Terminal A at the Denver airport when I landed after I missed my connecting flight in Cincinnati. Let me backtrack. I was all set to board my flight from Cincinnati to Phoenix when at the very last minute, there was a gate change. I'd missed a text notification as I was on a call with my mom in India, who was nervous about an upcoming trip she was taking solo, so I couldn't exactly hang up the phone. Seeing no activity around me, I realized my mistake. I sprinted to the new gate, bags flying behind me, and made it with 2 minutes to spare. I thanked my lucky stars and my cardio program as I handed the attendant my boarding pass. She stared at me blankly and explained that the pre-flight procedure was completed. In short, I wasn't getting on board. I politely requested that I be let on board. After all, the gate was still open, and I was there on time. Nothing I said or did seemed to connect with her, and she simply shut the jetway door while I looked at her in disbelief. When asked what my options were, she snapped back, stating that she needs to, in quotes, help other passengers to board the next flight and will be with me after that was done. She managed to take a moment and quip that there were no flights available until midday tomorrow, so I had enough time. The problem is, I can't leave tomorrow. You see, I had planned out our first ski trip with my boys, and we had to be on our way by 3 p.m. as we were carpooling with another family to make it to the resort on time. I quickly went to my kayak with my heart racing, ran through every permutation and combination possible to make it to my boys on time. What were the last flights remaining out of Cincinnati? Were there connecting flights from there that I could get to Phoenix? Could I just get to any city that is close to Phoenix and drive from there? One singular mission: I need to get home in time to make that ski trip. As it turns out, there were only 2 flights left later that night flying west out of Cincinnati, both on the same airline that I just missed, one to Denver and another to Vegas. My agent, the one who refused to let me on board, was boarding the Vegas trip, which was to leave in 30 minutes, and I'd found out that if I took that flight, I could catch the morning flight from Vegas to Phoenix and still make it home on time. But she just didn't want anything to do with me. Eventually, I went to the next agent who was boarding the flight to Denver. This agent listened to me. She comforted me, said she understood the gravity of the situation, shared her own story as she frantically started typing out on the keyboard in front of her. Mind you, this flight was to leave in 20 minutes, and by the time she was done, she shared reluctantly that I would need to buy a new ticket, but she'd get me to Denver and from Denver to Phoenix by 12:30 p.m. She further added that if I was lucky, I could even get a chance to get a standby ticket on the early morning 5:30 a.m. flight from Denver, which was sold off. Her only concern was I need to buy a new ticket. And she felt that that was their mistake because she should be able to rebook me in. That was her concern. For me, I didn't mind spending the monies. I was just happy to be able to make it on time. It was truly a day and night difference between the 2 interactions. One felt like frigid, cold rain, while the other was as if the sun had just opened up. And you know the best part? They were both with the same airline. One just refused to even listen to me, and the other lent a helping hand. The point is, we may have the best customer experience policies and procedures and intentions, But if we don't have the right people delivering it for us, our clients may not get the award-winning experience they should expect. The next time you hire someone, especially in a client-facing role, outside of their qualifications, look for key traits. For me, it's compassion. Others call it empathy. And while they're often used interchangeably, for me, there's a big difference. Empathy is a way of putting yourself in the other person's shoes. Know, feel, and share their pain. In effect, it's a mode of relating. Compassion, for me, is the ability to understand that feeling and respond to it with care and kindness. For my nerdy brain that processes things in equation, it's compassion is equal to empathy plus action with care and kindness. So in your hiring process, quiz candidates to see if they depict that trait. Some questions to think about, especially if you're looking for compassion, are: what do you do when someone comes to you with a problem? What's important in your mind for taking teamwork to flourish? How do you deal with clients that are angry? How do you approach delivering difficult news? And if you can, do these two additional things. Make your team part of the interview process. After all, they will be working together, and you'll find that your current team will catch on the candidate's inefficiencies a lot faster than you can. Let the candidate also interact with your existing clients. And if not possible, ask one of your top-notch clients to interact with the candidate for you. It'll make your clients feel elated and extra special, as well as tell you a lot about your candidate. Remember, if someone has compassion, outside of just improving member experience, they're likely to also help in enhancing communication and strengthening the relationship with your brand. All right, then, I'm going to see if I can get some shut-eye before I wake up at 4 a.m. and see if I can make this 5:30 a.m. flight. My name is Sumit Seth, co-founder of Nomly. For more info, please check out nomly.com. You can schedule a demo to get a feel for what it's all about and how we can help you see if your team is truly delivering and providing that consistent member experience to your clients and helping you create that profitable business. Use the referral code StrengthCoach to get started on a true, no strings attached, free 30-day trial.
All right, now it's time for the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, brought to you by Athletic Greens. 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens. I use it every day. For me, it fills those gaps in my nutrition. Now, they're going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Highly recommend getting the subscription, 20% off. You can cancel or skip at any time. Guys, go to athleticgreens.com/strengthcoach. All right, today I have the honor of having Coach Dom Starsia on. Don has been a coach for 42 years, including 18 as an assistant and the head coach at Brown University, and 24 years as the head coach at the University of Virginia. He retired from college coaching in 2016 as the winningest coach in NCAA Division I history, 4 Division I NCAA national championships, 8 times ACC Coach of the Year, 3-time National Coach of the Year. He's on the executive board at Harlem Lacrosse, and he's written an amazing book that was Coach Boyle had turned me on to it. I hope you'll be very happy. You probably heard us talking about that a couple of episodes ago as well. Leadership Lessons from a Lifetime in Lacrosse. Coach, thanks for doing this.
Anthony, happy to be here. Thanks.
All right. So I'm not completely through the book, but I've been kind of going back and forth. This is a fun book to read and see some of the letters. And it's really interesting with your own kids and the kids you've coached and letters to parents, which that's really the great stuff. And, the cool thing is that you were a parent too. So you were in the stands watching your son play lacrosse as well. So it's kind of, you've kind of gotten it from a couple different angles here. So I think you've really captured so many great points in this book.
Part of what my life in lacrosse, my life in coaching was about was, at one point earlier in my career, we had 4 children under 4 years old. I was the head coach at Brown at the time.
Wow.
And my wife was back at work as a nurse, and so what evolved for me was never really separating out work and life at home. I'm fortunate to be married to somebody that loved what I did, and both on the family side of things and on my professional side of things, I needed people to understand that these two worlds were going to be together. My son played lacrosse, so I was also a dad. My daughter played lacrosse, so I was on both sides of that and that issue. And so it just psychologists might have a field day, when they're talking about you have to separate out these different things. It wasn't that way for me. It was part of my life. And my son coached with me my last 3 years at Virginia. And I remember standing behind him one time, listening to him, and he was saying to our players that he said he talks to you the same way he talks to me at home, and I was glad to hear that because the same truths and values. I didn't have enough time to make stuff up, the stuff that I was preaching on the field to my players was the same thing I was saying to my children at home. It was just all part of the same life, and so it worked itself out for us, over a long period of time.
Yeah, I did notice that. And that was one thing that I did want to ask you about, actually, was because a lot of people, you said, they'll have a field day with you, the psychologist, is they do say there really does need to be that separation. And we see it in other chapters as well when you talk about, really your demeanor with the players. And we'll talk about that later when the priest and the rabbi walk into the bar, and the positive language and really kind of having that pleasant demeanor to a certain extent to make sure that they know they can trust you and that you're, so I think there's a lot of things in here that, you're preaching to the choir, but at the same time, there's so many that are like, no, this is how I did it. And this is how I feel. I think that was a great point about the family and the team.
Well, it's not so much the mechanics of it, in terms of the physical mechanics of how you put these two things together, your professional life and your family life. But for me, it was more about the values and the standards and stuff that we were going to establish. Like I say, I very much, with my team over all the years, our first rule was always tell the truth. And so, it kind of built my professional life on that premise, trying to make that impression on players. And it was just, and same kind of things at home. You're trying to raise children. You're trying to say, hey, be truthful with things, bear the consequences when you make mistakes, and letting people know the same consequence of having made a mistake, deal with it, whether it's my children or it's the players. And so, when it's funny, I coach at the Blue Ridge School right now, a private school. And they asked me the other day, I did a little TV thing for them. And they asked me, what's your coaching philosophy? And, I'm not really comfortable with that question, because I think it's an evolving concept over time. As you get a little smarter and get a little more experience, that could change. And when someone asks you that question, it's sort of, well, what's in mind the moment you're being asked a question, and given 10 minutes later, I might respond differently. But what I did say at that time, which now that I've had a little time to think about it, still holds, is that if there was a philosophy of coaching, it was simply helping young people develop the characteristics of being good leaders. And, those kind of things. So those kind of things, rather than philosophy of coaching, well, it's the X's and O's, how'd you like to play? We like to play fast or slow or this or that, or discipline or whatever, but it was more about the personal qualities that we wanted young people to exhibit, that in the end, we're going to make our team better, stronger, and the same things that I would want to see my children exhibit, that's what worked for me.
Yeah. We're going to go into some of those things in a little bit, but I want to start out with, in Letter to Parents 2, we're going to go to Letter to Parents 2 first. I'm quoting you, you develop a deeper understanding of team concepts involved in the sport of men's lacrosse on the football field, soccer pitches, basketball courts, and hockey rinks of their youth. And you also talk about stop trying to find a club team that you think college coaches will see you, right? Will find you. So I think that's kind of the pressure for a lot of parents is, hey, we got to go year round because, we need to go to stay on this club team because then they're going to go to the college showcases and et cetera, et cetera. Can you just expand on this idea about how they're developing team concepts on those other courts and rinks and pitches?
Yeah. Well, first off, I would say that college coaches are generally good at what they do. And so, the bottom line question for parents is your son good enough? Period. And so, I run into so many parents that overthink the process, that they, I want to get this perfect. I want to go to the perfect camp or the perfect tournament. I want my son to play on the perfect club team. If your son's not big enough or strong enough or fast enough or not committed enough to the process, to what's going on, he's not going to be good enough no matter what club team he plays on. And in general, again, it's important to maybe get word out to a college coach, but they're going to do their job. They're going to find you if you're good enough. And so that's one part of it. The second part of it, to your question, is you build this athletic foundation, in a sport like lacrosse, similar to basketball, where it's very fluid. And you need to be able to make decisions in the midst of the action, flying up and down the field and all. You need to have instincts that you can fall back on in those kind of things. The best of my teams were teams that played fast and accepted the responsibility of making decisions on their own. Well, those kind of things, the qualities of athletic anticipation, things like that, you develop those, again, playing soccer, or playing basketball, playing football, the way a defensive back moves, or the way a center back will move in soccer when the ball's on the far side of the field. Those kind of things that you do without talking, as a lacrosse coach, I can see it in people that they just instinctually are doing the right thing. If all you do is play lacrosse, you just can't build a wide enough base of all of those qualities. And so I do think that, again, football and all those team sports, soccer, basketball is maybe the best one, but hockey and all of those different things build a foundation for athleticism that makes you a better lacrosse player at the end of the day. When you get to the point where you're ready, now I'm working on my skills, I'm focusing on lacrosse. Okay, but you've got this wealth of knowledge, of experience that you can depend. That's an instinct in your play, that just makes you a better player at the end of the day. And I have recruited in my lifetime, one of our 2006 undefeated national championship team. One of the captains of that team was a defensive midfielder by the name of J.J. Morrissey. I never saw J.J. play lacrosse before he came to Virginia.
Wow.
He really wanted to come, and I tried to drop him in the recruiting. I said, we got to the end. I had one spot left. I said, and JJ, I said, I can't do it. I haven't seen you play, JJ. And a couple of weeks later, so I offered the spot to somebody else. He came back to me a couple of weeks later and said, Coach, please, I really want to come to Virginia. We were able to make it work out. But my point is that the only thing I had seen from JJ was a football film. I watched him as a tailback, and he'd hit the hole, and got around the end. And I thought to myself, geez, if he's ever seen a lacrosse game and he could do that on the lacrosse field, we can make use of it. It worked out better than I even would have imagined. But, I've sort of got the reputation of being the multi-sport guy, but I used to spend a lot of time going to high school football games and basketball games, watching these guys do these other things. Thinking that we can clean up their lacrosse skills if that's what's required. And I would tell you, Anthony, there's no question. It goes back to my own background. I'm from Long Island, which is a big lacrosse area, but I'd never seen lacrosse growing up. My high school, for whatever reason, Valley Stream Central, didn't have it. We didn't have lacrosse in my town. And so I'd heard of it, but I'd never seen it before I went to Brown University. And in the days when you had to play on freshman teams in your first year, I got recruited to play football. I happened to be the captain of the freshman football team, and a buddy on the football team said, why don't you come out for lacrosse? And I was first generation, a little lost socially and lost academically, and most comfortable on the athletic side of things. And so I said, I'll try. I was curious. I'll try lacrosse. And I just fell in love with it. And so my background is that other sport background, work hard and develop your lacrosse skills, and then be able to go forward with that. So you sort of are who you are That's who. So I always was looking for guys that were, athletes first. At the place like the University of Virginia, you can get outstanding athletes who are also outstanding lacrosse players.
Yeah.
But I still, when I went out to watch games, people always ask, "What do you look for first? What stands out at you?" What stands out is a athleticism. Is a boy faster, quicker than everybody else around him? But then there's an element of thinking quicker, and an IQ element that knowledgeable coaches quickly pick up on, and so you can see it, and that's the piece that I think gets developed by participation in these other sports.
Yeah, and even in Summer Musings, a letter to high school students, and you were answering the question to parents: is your son one of the best athletes in his high school? Period. Not just in lacrosse. It was, are they? So obviously, something that you look for. I want to move on and go back, take a step back to letter to parents. One, the main feel for this letter to me was let them fly, make the mistakes and learn. And it seems like over the years, you must have seen it seems to be getting worse. I don't know if it is, but we have these snowplow parents, the helicopter parents. Now there's the snowplow parents that push all the obstacles out of their kids' way. And you had to do it. Your son wasn't playing. You said you were watching the moves on the bench when he was in college at one point, right?
That's right.
Talk to me about this idea of letting them fly and make the mistakes. I know it can be hard, not only as a coach, but as a parent.
Yeah. And, I'm not inventing the premise, but failure is such an important part of growing up and learning. And to me, parents are trying to remove the risk from everything, the risk of failure from every activity for their children. And so they're denying them a learning tool. I was telling somebody the other day, one of the things that you just never see nowadays that we just grew up with was, choosing up. We used to get down on the playground, and in my town, we played football, basketball, and baseball, and we had the same group of guys. We went to the field every day. My father didn't even know I was playing sports until I got a little notoriety in high school. He was the New York City cop, 2 jobs, so he wasn't going to be intrusive. So we learned to, settle our differences on the court, we learned to, if there were 3 teams on a basketball court, if you lost, you were sitting, and so you played to win so you could stay on the court, and I hate to see all of that uncertainty taken away from young people these days. When I look back at it, I remember those days of choosing up teams and playing games, and I remember my friends looking at me, sort of saying, "Okay, Don, put the teams together so we can play." And they, the responsibility was to kind of put them together evenly so we'd have a chance, and without thinking in any way. I was developing leadership skills, that I just don't see where young people get that experience now, and it's really, it would be a concern. I'm older now. My kids are grown. I think of my son has 2 young sons. I have 2 grandsons, and these are the kind of things that I think he'll be thinking about and need to figure out for himself.
Yeah, I can remember growing up, the same idea. I'm 56, so growing up, and that's like you got off that bus and you went, whatever season it was, whether it was hockey season, we were playing street hockey or baseball, or the teams are always different. We did it at lunch, at recess, at lunch in school.
Yep.
I mean, it was, and you're making your own rules. So you have to kind of manage that piece of it too with the other kids, and how do you get along with the other kids and move and push forward and stand your ground. And there's so many things to be learned from the playground.
Yeah, and truthfully, we played tackle football in those days. Can you imagine? Driving by a field and seeing young kids out there playing tackle football. We used to do that. It's funny. I work with the softball coach at UVA. Nice woman, and she asked me to help her, be kind of her jobs coach, and I'm happy to do that. And she was talking about an issue that they had, that some girl slid in at home and thought that the catcher tagged her too hard, and it resulted in it resulted in a series of meetings and discussions amongst the team and an outburst in the locker room. And I said to her, I said, Joanna, in my world, that would have been settled right there. You tag me too hard, I'm coming up swinging. And we figure it out. And as a coach, those things occasionally are going to happen on the practice field. And I'm not even saying it's a guys versus gals situation, but it happens on the practice field. As a coach, you sort of let some of that go a little bit. People might cringe to hear that, but you want guys to figure it out a little bit, and we're not going to let it get out of hand, of course, but that's what's, again, removed. I'm not a big fan of all these team meetings, let's get to it. Let's figure it out and take responsibility and make some decisions and let's move on, so.
Yeah, Jeremy Frisch, who does a lot of work with young folks as well, he said childhood used to be great preparation for sport, but sport has now taken over childhood. Young athletes need knowledgeable and creative coaches to help fill the athletic gaps left out by the lack of diversity of movement and free play that was once found in abundance years ago. So this idea of also developing that athleticism on the playground as well.
It's going back to the softball thing. When I first began to work with the softball team, which was 2 years ago, I went to their first softball practice in the fall, 2 falls ago. And, it was unbelievable. People, knew exactly where they needed to get to. It was organized. At the end of the day, I said to the coach, the head coach, I said, in my 42 years of coaching college lacrosse, we never had a practice that organized, in my whole life, because I think a little chaos is helpful, and I like players kind of yapping at each other and getting after it a little bit, and so a little bit, I'm a big fan of a little bit of irreverency, so and that's what I've tried to, guide her to do, to lighten up a little bit, loosen up a little bit so the players can, I think you develop those independent, those sense of responsibility, of independence on the practice field, and so if everything is so organized that you don't have to think, you just run to your spot, I think you lose a little something there.
Yeah, I love that idea too. Coach, let's move on to in letter to a college freshman. And now we're going to start to get to developing these leadership qualities. And you have 2 things that I wanted you to expand on. The Pasque rule, get up for breakfast every morning. How does this for you have an impact on athletes?
Yeah, Matthew was Matthew Pasque he was the one that I offered the spot to, JJ Morrissey's spot in that 2006 class. When I had that last spot, I offered it to Matt Pasque, and so when Matthew got to Virginia, he was a fairly modest student, and I didn't know what to make of him as a player exactly, except he scored a lot of goals for his high school team, and he was a little bit different as a kid, and I like that about him, and we remained close to this day. But as his career went on, he wound up being an academic All-American. He graduated from our commerce school, which is one of the top commerce schools in the country. He was a 2-time All-American. He won 2 national championships, and as we talked about his career at some point, he said, "My rule is that I get up for breakfast every day," and so. I certainly tell that story to everybody. What I'll do is I'll say to the players, I say, "Look, I have a pill right here, and this pill will make you an All-American in lacrosse. You'll have an A- average in school. You're going to wind up being able to do all these different things, and there are no negative side effects to this pill. Do you want it?" And they all say, "Yeah, give me the pill. Give me the pill." I said, "Okay, the pill is getting up early every day. Get up for breakfast every day." And you can imagine to yourself right now, if I got up for breakfast every day while I was in college, how much more I could have accomplished. And that's what Matt did. And so the other piece of that going forward for me has always been that when I'm talking to my teams and we're talking about off-season workouts and things like that, I said, "Fellas, do it in the morning. Get yourself up in the morning." I said, with each passing moment in a day, there are going to be more distractions in the world. So do it first. And so that piece of it, for a college student, many of whom don't wake up until 11 or 12, you could be buying back, 10 hours a week of, I'm not saying you're going to use it just to do schoolwork or you're going to be in a weight room for that time, but you have 10 extra hours that your teammates don't have. I want to get ahead. How am I going to catch up to this other player who plays my position? Well, here's how you do it. Get yourself up in the morning, buy back a little extra time, spend some time on your skill work or whatever else, and you're going to give yourself a chance.
Yeah, and I like how also in the letter you put the responsibility. You're talking earlier about the letter to parents, giving them a little bit of room to fly, but also putting some of the responsibility on the college freshman. Stop calling your mother. Talk to us about stop calling your mother.
It's now the liberty of being able to do that now that I'm not coaching. I can say that, because I used to always joke that when I was talking to my teams, I said, if I told you to actually stop calling your mother, half of you would immediately call your mother after practice, and half of your mothers would call the school president and say, why is the lacrosse coach telling my son not to be calling me? But it is telling the players, stand on your own 2 feet, and being part of a team. I mentioned it in the letter. Being part of a team is a special experience. I'm not picking on moms. Your mother doesn't need to know about every little thing. One of your teammates gets in a little jam, whatever. Your mother doesn't need to know that. And generally, amongst the parents, there's a certain gossipy quality about it, and they don't know everything, and so they shouldn't know most things, and so. Keep some of that stuff to yourself and deal with it, whatever it's going to be.
Absolutely. Coach, in a letter to a rising sophomore, you talked about, I hope you have decided not to pledge a fraternity this spring. Can you talk about this idea? Because you talk a lot about balance, but at the same time, can be contrary to this idea of finding a balance. Like, hey, you want the full college experience. Talk to us about this idea.
Yeah, well, at a school like the University of Virginia, which is a very social place, I see the fraternities, and again, I sort of got a little reputation as the sort of anti-fraternity coach, and I thought that was a little unfair. I never said to anybody, you can't do that, but I just needed for guys to be aware of what the pitfalls were going to be, the players that I had over the years, you pledged the fraternity in the spring of your freshman year. And that was the spring that for those young players was always going to be the toughest. You're trying to be a player, you're trying to keep up on your schoolwork, and you've got this social pressure to be out there and, on the weekends and in the mornings and all the demands that joining a fraternity are going to take. I would describe it as there were 3 circles. 2 of them are the same size, one about half the other size. The first circle is academics at a place like Virginia or Brown, our academics. The second circle is athletics. And I don't disguise the fact that for many of my players, lacrosse was as important as their academic piece. They came to Virginia to play lacrosse. So let's say it's the same size. The other one is everything else that goes on in a college life. I said, so fellas, if you want to make the small circle bigger, then you have to decide which of the big circles is going to get smaller. And so you want the small circle to get bigger, your academics are going to take a hit or your athletics are going to take a hit. That's the way it works. You want to be the Xbox champion. You want to be the guy that goes out that people call every time they want to go out at night, then this one's going to get bigger and the other 2 are going to get smaller. That's the way it works. So I never said you can't do this. I wanted my students, my players, to have a full college experience. But I needed them to be able to, as quickly as possible, order their lives in a way in which they weren't hurting the things that were truly important, or they didn't realize were truly important yet, but were going to realize a year or 2 down the line. Geez, I wish I hadn't booted the academics my freshman year, because I'm now spending 2 years trying to make up for that. And, I often had guys, that would dig a hole for themselves as freshmen that they spent the next year or 2 trying to dig their way out of. And wouldn't it have been better if they had had a stronger academic performance in that first year?
Yeah. Good point. And I love the circle analogy as well. Coach, let's talk about some leadership. You said the single characteristic, and I know this could change, but single characteristic of every championship team was outstanding leadership. Can you expand on the two distinct pieces of that athletic puzzle? Like you said, pure leadership and coaching administrative leadership. Just give us an overview of those two different areas.
Yeah, it's just simply that it would be depending on which audience I happen to be talking to. There's a lot of the same characteristics for both, but there are some things around the edges, like we talked a little bit about, positive language and, making the importance of the recruiting and stuff that I would direct more at a coach or someone in an administrator than I would to the players. To the players, it was about the qualities that are going to make them outstanding leaders. And again, I think those same qualities apply to coaches and administrators, but there are some other things that they need to be, taken into consideration. And I do feel like, for all the teams, it wasn't just championship teams. You had teams that maybe are not going to win a championship or are not capable of winning a championship that can have a great experience. So I would always describe it to teams as being a part of one of those teams that plays closest to its potential is such a special experience that it's worth the sacrifices that are required to make that happen. And everybody has to sacrifice in order for that to happen. And then we would talk about those kind of things.
Excellent. Now, yeah, we talked a little about making mistakes. You were talking in that chapter about the value of scars, which is this idea of like, yeah, you're going to get beat up a little bit. You're going to have these scars from the mistakes, and you're going to have to just be honest. I want you to just expand. Obviously, I know what honesty means, but you bring up two things. I'm going to have you talk about fearlessness next, but you talk about honesty. I just want to get the book out really quick. On page 114, I love this quote. Okay, so becoming a great lacrosse player, truthfulness to oneself, a great team leader, truthfulness to your peers, and part of a great organization, truthfulness to the environment is worth that considerable sacrifices that may be required. Truth is liberating, but it can also be unwieldy. Can you expand on exactly what are the situations that come up in those three, with the peers, with yourself, with your peers, and then with that organization?
Yeah, well, the first part would be looking in the mirror, waking up in the morning and looking in the mirror. And that's about taking responsibility. There's a tendency for young people, the coach doesn't like me, or my history teacher doesn't like me, and I can tell you right now, I don't even know who you are, but I can tell you right now, that's not keeping you off the field. That these coaches are myopic in their commitment to, putting their best team out there. And if you're good enough, they're gonna recognize it, and they're gonna put you in the right spot. And so you need to look in the mirror and decide for yourself that I'm going to make a difference here, and I'm going to do this. So that's the first piece of it. And I remember back to my own experience when I was a sophomore at Brown. I started playing lacrosse as a freshman. My sophomore year, I was on like the third midfield. I played for a guy that if you were on the third midfield, you didn't do much, and you didn't do much shooting in practice during the drills. You backed up and chased balls, and we were on our spring trip, and I went to him and said, Coach, you don't even tell us the plays. I don't understand that. And he gave me some double talk just to get me out of his face, but I remember that moment. I so distinctly remember that moment in which I said, screw this, I'm playing, and right at that moment, I just started to stop caring about what the upperclassmen thought. They, what are you running hard for, you young pup? When I want to be, no, it doesn't matter. I'm playing. I went hard on every ground ball and this and that. I took control of my life. And like the next week, I was on the second midfield. And before the season was over, I was on the first midfield. And that was the launch of my career when I did that. So looking in the mirror and acknowledging that you're more in control of your fate than you think, and stop making excuses for all the other things that are getting in the way. Truthfulness to your teammates, in terms of leadership in particular, is having that guy standing next to you belly aching about the coach, in the locker room. He turns to you and says, I should be playing, right? And not just giving him what he wants to hear, having the nerve that that you have a sense of hey, you're either telling him you don't have to confront him. You don't have to be saying, the coach is right. You don't deserve to be playing, but to be saying to him, hey, look, why don't you go back and talk to the coach again, or telling the guy the truth. And I would tell all of those young people that, are sort of put in that situation, that guy someday he's coming back to you and saying, Anthony, I respected you more for telling me what I needed to hear at that moment, rather than just giving yourself the easy out by telling him what he wants to hear. And so, again, on the leadership thing, being truthful. Again, you don't need to be looking for trouble. You don't need to be the guy that, kid drops a ball, you stink. No. But when people are saying things that are inappropriate, you being a person that stands up and says, hey, we're the coaches who got this right. Go back and talk to him again. Whatever needs to be said, and you're giving it to him in a truthful manner. And then on the administrative side of things, there are all kinds of instances where there's a temptation in the recruiting. There's a great player there that I'm recruiting, and if I feel like a goalie, for instance, you only play one goalie. If I told him you're going to start your freshman year, even though I don't even have control of that while I'm sitting there talking to this young man. We get on the practice field. There are 40 kids on the team, 40 guys on the team. I'm playing the best goalie, and so I'm not making this guy a promise that I can't keep at the end of the day. Those kind of things. I'm going to increase your scholarship over the course of your career. And then not do that. I actually use the example. I get in an argument with coaches about sometimes. I'm also careful, and it probably comes up in the book, about saying things like, "Hey, fellas, this is a really big game." At Virginia, we play Hopkins one day, we're playing Maryland the next week, we're playing North Carolina, then we're playing Duke and stuff, and so saying to guys, hey, fellas, this is a really big game. So win or lose, what am I saying about the game next week? And if it happens not to be a game of that magnitude, how do I get them to be serious about their preparation for it? And so my mantra was no big games. And I can remember I got grief from a reporter one time, no big game Starsia, you better be ready for this game. I replied by saying, look, you've never coached a team. They're looking for little nuggets of truth. And this little nugget of truth is that we want to reach a level of play that we take every game seriously. By saying no big games, we want to get to a level of high performance for every game. And you can turn it around and say for every day, because we're not going to place one game on a pedestal, one above the others, and then have to come back. This is a big game, Anthony, and then next week come back. This is a really big game, Anthony. You're saying, Coach, come on, you just used that last week,
Yeah.
So that kind of truth, sometimes it's an administrative truth about playing time or scholarships or this and that, and sometimes it's talking to your team, over the course of a season about the things that you're trying to do as a team, and that for me was one that we always used.
Yeah, and you talk about that honesty will always build trust. I was laughing when you were talking about, in the beginning you were trying to think of something profound to say every time, but then sometimes you were just like, guys, I don't have anything to say today, which that honesty is like, that's awesome. They smell the authenticity.
That's right. And they know because they've been there. And so that they and they're confident enough and respectful enough and trust me enough to be able to deal with that, and it's, to be honest, it's again, the leadership question. Again, I'm talking to players. It's, I talk about toughness as a characteristic of leadership. And for me, toughness is a willingness to communicate. But we all know athletes. We've all been on teams with athletes that just yell all the time. They just, they're screaming at me, "Let's go," or this and that. And I say that's not really leadership. It's a lot harder to say meaningful things to people. And so whether it's the coach or it's a player, a peer, take an extra moment to say something meaningful to someone. I think it'll go a lot farther than just yapping at guys the whole time.
Yeah. And another kind of along this same line, you talk about fearlessness a lot. define that for us and what that means for you and the player.
Yeah, I was talking to a high school program in Missouri, actually, and we were talking about leadership and this and that, but and I had never really listed the qualities of leadership, and so at the end of this talk, this young player, I think he was only a sophomore or a junior at the time, in a little high school in Missouri, came up to me and said, "Coach, what's the single most important characteristic of leadership, of individual characteristic of leadership?" And kind of put me on the spot, and but the word that came to mind that to this day, I still use it when I talk about it, I use it first, is fearlessness. And for me, what that means is that somebody who is willing to, well, first off, to be a leader, to be a captain, it's not an easy job, and it requires a steel spine, and so being willing. And I, again, talking to young people in particular, I said, you know how difficult it can be to stand up in front of your peers and say, fellas, this is what we're doing. We're going to do it every time like this, and we are not going to deviate from the purpose and deviate from our approach. And so being willing to do that, again, I think requires a certain fearlessness. At the same time, that person needs to be willing to walk into the coach's office and say, "Hey, coach, we need to back off here, or we need to do this other thing and stuff." And so, a willingness to do those kind of things, and so a fearlessness without going over the edge. You want to be somebody who is willing to tell the team, "This is what we're doing," and we're going to do it like this every single time. And then, if you're doing it like that, then you buy the credibility, you have the authority then to be able to require that of your teammates.
Yeah. Coach, you talk about in coaching leadership, strengthening your team from the bottom up. I always love the story of John F. Kennedy going into NASA and seeing somebody sweeping the floors, and he introduced himself and said, "Hey, how are you? I'm John F. Kennedy. What's your role here, son?" And he said, "Sir, I'm helping to put a man on the moon." He was kind of understanding his role, no matter how small it was. He was making sure that the area was clean. He's still a part of that bigger picture. How do you do that? Because you talked about strengthening the team from the bottom up. How do you do that to make sure some of those guys, because there's a lot of guys, like you said, there's 40 guys. How do you do that?
One experience that I had, we have you can do a PhD, a master's and a PhD at the University of Virginia in sports psychology, and those students would often ask if they could come and watch practice about doing one thing or another, watching something or another, and I always say yes. And one time I asked them, "What are you looking for?" And one guy kind of let the cat out of the bag. He said, "We're looking for the number of contacts you have with players that don't play a key role on the team," and so a light went off, that day that those people were there watching practice. I was all over the guys at the end of the bench. I was, I had my arm around guys, talking to guys, but I'll be honest with you, it just brought to mind how important that was. And so, I think I'd always been pretty good at it, but I was reminded of it. And so I was certain as my career went on that I was better and better at that those guys were really important. There are a lot of examples of guys that contributed to our team that never played a minute, and so getting those guys to maximize their performance, even though the performance was not on Saturdays, was really, really, really important. And I would also suggest you go back to JJ Morrissey, that player that was the captain of that 2006 team. And at the end of practice, the little things, emphasizing to your team that the little things are going to make a difference, whether it's a little thing that we're doing strategically on the field, or the little things surrounding the program that need to get done, keeping the locker room clean, or this and that. And I would always use the example that on that 2006 team, undefeated national champions, JJ was one of the captains. If we were collecting balls at the end of practice, more than likely, JJ was 2 fields over chasing some stray ball, and the freshmen were in a little gaggle talking to each other about how great they were in high school. Yeah. And I go in there and I'd say, "Do you see who's that? Look, you see that guy out there? that's the best player on the team, because JJ knew that was important to me, and that it was important to putting the team together, that we took care of all these little things. So the freshmen wouldn't have known that, and that was the thing they needed to learn. And one of the great joys of my career as I went on was having older players helping me teach the younger guys, this is what's required in order for us to be successful. So, both of those things, making sure I had contact. I'll tell you, frankly, having contact with the players that were not playing, which I always felt like was really important. One of my last years at Brown, I had a 2-time first-team All-American midfielder. And one night he grabbed me and said to me, Coach, he was a senior about to graduate. And he said, I never got to know you as well as I thought I would. And again, a light just went off, and for me, I was always worried about the backup goalie or the kid who wasn't playing. How happy is he going to be? I needed him to be a positive force in the locker room. I didn't worry about the guy that was the 2-time first-team All-American. I assumed he couldn't be happier, but, I had neglected him to a certain extent, certainly in his life, in that individual case. And so, again, it reminded me that, I need to make contact with all these guys, in different ways and stuff. And, all those things contribute to who you become as a coach going forward.
Yeah. Obviously, over time, you're adjusting and making the. I love the story of Brad Malfris. Early in his career, he was only interested in his own interpretation of the universe, but by senior year, that all changed. So, my question to you was, I guess, and you've been kind of talking about this last couple of minutes, was, how did he really make that change, and how do we as coaches kind of nurture this without dismissing him in the early years to say, like, hey, maybe that this guy isn't leadership material, let's say, if we felt like that, without dismissing him, to kind of say, how do we nurture this? And also, I think you said you go back and forth on this. Do you tell a player about your long range intention on leadership development? So how do you kind of balance all of that?
Well, again, some of that goes back to, I use experiences in my own life, obviously, to tell stories and to provide lessons. I think, again, it goes back to, this is who I am. This was my life. And so I also sat on the bench. I played professional box lacrosse, sat on the bench. I know what that's like, fellas. And so somebody like Bray, Bray is he's an elite Army Ranger now. And so he's got those skills. At the time, his freshman year, I might not have guessed he was going to turn into the leader of that team the way that he did, because he was a little bit obsessed with the smaller details of things, And like I said, I'm sure I mentioned it in the book. I mean, he was obsessed. He wanted to know the exact rules of everything. He wanted to know when the ball was thrown from A to B. Tell me exactly how I'm supposed to move. And I'd be saying, Bray, it just doesn't work that way. This is a fluid sport. You need to interpret what's going on and be able to adjust accordingly on the fly. Here's what here's the flow of the action, but you're going to need to make decisions in the middle of all of that, and I told people early in his career, I really thought, I'm not sure he belongs here at the University of Virginia. Playing wise, certainly he did, but I'm not sure we were ever going to reach a meeting of the minds in terms of what he wanted for himself, and he worked his tail off, and so but we also, we unwittingly, I think, we just got to know each other a little bit. We began to depend on each other a little bit, and as he got into his senior year, it's almost like he said, "Okay, coach, I'm gonna let my guard down here a little bit. I'm gonna put the team's welfare ahead of my own, ahead of some ground ball I want to pick up and stuff." And I tightened up some of the things that I was teaching to help satisfy him, and so I made some adjustments also. So there was we met kind of halfway, and then his senior year, our 2011 national championship, which was his senior year. make no bones about the fact that we won that championship because of the leadership in the locker room, and led by Bray, and we had a couple of other good captains, John Holdy and Steele Stanwyck, and they did a really nice job. And that team was in distress in the middle of the season, and those guys stood up tall, and displayed that fearlessness and that toughness and all of those other qualities that I think are so important, that selflessness that are so important. And we made the most unlikely run to win the national championship that year, and it was because of Bray. And now, I might not have guessed early in his career that Bray and I would be close, but now, he stops here every time he's in town, every time he comes through, and he's one of the players that I'm closest to at the end of the day. And again, I think if you're truthful, and I'm not saying I have these qualities, but if you're truthful and genuine and authentic, and you sort of wear people down with that a little bit, and at the end of the day, they sort of, okay, let's try it that way, finally, when the Bray was absolutely had absolutely decided that, his way was the only way in the beginning. I'm just going to outwork everybody, and that's what he did. But there was more to it than that. That's not what lacrosse and basketball are all about, those kind of fluid sports.
Yeah, and you mentioned selflessness, and it's interesting because you talked about that being an important quality, but you said it's hard because all great athletes are completely selfish. Do you feel like it's the culture that you set up as a coach, as an administration, that is going to kind of get them through that by kind of doing those things like you talked about, having those qualities as a coach and a leader all the time, almost like you said, you beat them down with it. That kind of helps them turn it around into like what happened with Bray.
I would say that my job as a coach was convincing players that it was going to be worth the sacrifices that were definitely going to be required in order for us to be successful, to have the team that we wanted to have, and so convincing guys to put the team's welfare ahead of their own was going to be key. And at the end of the day, they were going to be able to accomplish more individually than they ever dreamed for themselves if they were actually willing to do that. I tell the story of Chris Rotelli all the time. Chris was the captain of our 2003 national championship team, and he was a first-team All-Ivy midfielder as a sophomore and a junior. One of the best offensive players in the country, scored a lot of goals for us, very good player. Going into his senior year, I kept saying to him, you have more to offer us. You have more to offer us than just scoring goals. And he would be looking at me like, what are you talking about? I've always scored goals in my life. It's what I love to do, and I'm really good at it, and I'd say, no, there's more. And then finally, it was the summer before his senior year when we had a talk, and he said to me, okay, look, I'll do whatever you want, and so I'm even not sure what you're asking me to do, but I'll do whatever you want. And he put the team ahead of himself, and he won starting in the fall until that national championship game in the spring of 2003. We used to go out and run on the road, which the teams don't do anymore. We go out and run 4 miles or 5 miles on the road. Chris Rotelli won every run at every distance from September to May, whether it was a 40-yard dash on the field or a 5-mile run on the road. And when we got to that spring, as opposed to being just a guy that scored goals, he would not come off the field, and he wanted to pick up ground balls and play defense and clear the ball and do all these different things. And so at the end of the day, we win the national championship, and he is not only selected as the outstanding player in the country, he's the only men's lacrosse player ever selected as the ACC Athlete of the Year. Wow. Ahead of all those basketball guys at Carolina and Duke and all those guys. Yeah. And, and we win the national championship and all. And so he accomplished more individually than he probably ever dreamed for himself. And it was because, essentially, he put the welfare of the team ahead of his own. He stopped obsessing about his own goal scoring and saying, okay, what do you want me to do? I'll do it, so not only did the team accomplish more, but he accomplished more individually by not thinking about it, and just being willing to put the team ahead of his own, the team's welfare ahead of his own.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Coach, I kind of want to finish up on some of the language as coaches. This is the Strength Coach podcast. So, in The Priest and the Rabbi Walk into the Bar, you were mentioning this idea about positive language. And an example you gave was it's the difference between, saying don't foul or make the smart play. And you also talked earlier about in coaching leadership chapter, you can never take it back. So just kind of go over the language and how you evolved over the years with how you speak to the players.
I was a young head coach at Brown, and we had a head coaches meeting. The athletic department organizes head coaches meeting. They were going to bring in a guest speaker. I didn't even really want to go, but I went to it, and guy got up and talked about speaking to people in a positive way and the positive results you were going to have because of that. And for some reason, I'm not even sure, it just absolutely resonated with me. College coaches are generally the smarter people on the field, the most clever people on the field. I had a real knack for sarcasm, and from that moment, listening to that guy talk, I just changed my language talking to guys, and when I'm talking to coaches about this very thing, what I'm telling them is, because this is what coaches want to hear. I'm telling coaches, it'll help you win more. Never mind how players feel. It'll help you win more.
Yeah.
You'll be a better coach. And that's the piece you need to, that's the piece you can hit them over the head with, and then you're talking about couching things in a positive way. It's easy. Players, college guys or high school guys, they give you so much ammunition for sarcasm, and I'm always telling coach, bite your tongue, bite your tongue. Take an extra second to say something that's positive, as opposed to the quick thing that's going to come out of your mouth, that rolls out of your mouth, that hits somebody hard. Because again, like you suggested, you can never take it back. 25 years later, that player is going to come to you and say, "Coach, do you remember when you called me this on the practice?" And you're saying, "No, I don't really remember that." But for him, it really mattered. You can never take it back, and they never forget. And so now what I would suggest to you also is I'm mindful of saying these things are generally not black and white. It's not. I don't usually talk in absolutes. It's got to be this way or it's got to be this way. The world is kind of gray. And the example on this topic is we're standing in the driveway. I'm standing in the driveway with my 4-year-old son, and the ball is rolling toward the street. I'm not telling, because again, the example of talking to your children, I'm not telling him, hey, consider your options. I'm telling him, don't run into the street. And so, players want to be coached hard. I'm also careful about that. And so, players want to know what the limits are, and they don't mind being yelled at. But you can still do it in a positive way, a reinforcing way, and don't make it personal. Don't make it sarcastic. Don't make it cutting, because again, those things come back to haunt you at the end of the day. And even if you do it to a guy, sometimes if you do it to a guy that's, on the end of the bench, and you think, well, it's not going to affect our team. Yes, it does, because the other guys are looking at you, maybe picking on somebody that doesn't play that much and stuff. Yeah. And so I'm even more mindful with those guys to make sure that they're getting a positive message. But even for the starters at a place like the University of Virginia, generally lack of confidence is a concern. People would think, oh, the UVA lacrosse players, they must all be cocky as can be. If they are, it's generally a kind of a false confidence. These players, even at this level, never have too much confidence. And so, again, you want to be truthful. You want to coach them hard. But at the same time, you want to kind of build them up a little bit, because they probably need that.
Absolutely. It's hard for us Italian kids from New York to
absolutely. That's right.
Coach, I want to remind everybody the book is called, I hope you will be very happy, Leadership from a Lifetime in Lacrosse. Coach, I love all of these lessons that also came from, going to a continuing education lecture or hearing from the students and really applying. It's a great lesson that we need to keep our ears open and our eyes open. We can learn from everywhere. The book is amazing. I'm not even finished with it. I've learned so much. So thank you for coming on and sharing all about about your experience over the last 42 years. Amazing stuff.
Anthony, thank you very much. It was fun to do it. I look forward to thinking back to some of the memories of some of these things, and I really enjoy being able to talk to people. And if I can provide my experience, can provide a little help for somebody, then that's just great.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 352 of the Strength Coach Podcast. The show notes are at continuefit.com or strengthcoachpodcast.com. Don't forget, you can try the new strengthcoach.com out for 7 days for free. Go to strengthcoach.com to access that offer. Special thanks to Chris Parker and the folks over at Perform Better, on sale right now. 50% off a bunch of stuff. Bumper plates, kettlebells, dumbbells, you name it. Also, Boyle's complete youth training DVD set. It's only $49. You got to get it now. The one-day seminars continue in LA, February 18th. They're in Boston, March 18th, and Chicago, April 22nd. The summit dates are set for Orlando, Chicago, Long Beach, and Providence. Check it all out at performbetter.com. Guys, thanks to Coach Boyle and Coach Starsia for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength and conditioning and performance enhancement and coaching. Check out the anniversary interview I did with Coach Boyle, 40 Mistakes, 40 Years. There's a link to access that at strengthcoachpodcast.com. Thanks to Sumit Seth and Namli helping build relationships through personalized communication. So your members stay longer and pay longer. Go to namli.com. Use the referral code StrengthCoach to get started on a free 30-day trial. Thanks to Athletic Greens. Visit athleticgreens.com/strengthcoach to get your free year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs today. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. My name's Anthony Rena. Thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you next time.